الصلاة وأتم التسليم وأكمل التحيات على سيد السادات سيدنا ونبينا محمد خير البريات وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. Alhamdulillah, in our lessons on Mukhtasar al-Quduri, in which we have been looking at the section on financial transactions, mu'amalat. And this is an important section because one of the key tests of taqwa is how one upholds the limits of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in our dunya, And two of the key tests of that are how one is in one's relationships in terms of upholding good character and fulfilling the rights of those whom we owe social rights to. And secondly, how we are with respect to earning our living and how we spend our money, and how we are with respect to the halal and the haram related to our financial transactions. And this is, if our social dealings are a test of our akhlaq, our material dealings are a test of our taqwa. Right? And these are two of the great. This is why when Imam Muhammad al-Hassan was asked, why don't you write books in zuhud, in renouncing worldliness? He said, I've written books in mu'amalat, in financial transactions. Right? Because this is where zuhud, renouncing worldliness, is tested, that you leave your worldly inclinations and whims before the command of God, before the sunnah of His beloved Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam. That's the true test of taqwa, right? Right? And it goes way beyond just halal and haram ingredients kind of thing, right? Because that, yes, has an element, but there is a much broader aspect. The chapter we're looking at today, Kitab Sulh, the chapter on reconciliation, is a particularly important chapter because there are specific aspects of sulh, of reconciliation, that arise in financial transactions, right? Because when people transact, they may differ. And when they differ, restoring agreement is one of the high aims of the Sharia. Why? Because overall, if we look at the specific rule here, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us in the Quran, وَالصُّلْحُ خَيْرٌ, reconciliation is good. Right? Reconciliation is good. Right? وَالصُّلْحُ خَيْرٌ. Right? And this is a categorical L. As-sulh, all reconciliation is good. Any reconciliation between two disputing parties is good, right? Unless it is intrinsically not good, right? And we'll see there's implications of this, that even if someone makes an untrue claim, you would be rewarded for reconciling with them rather than prolonging a dispute, right? As a general guide, right? We'll see specifics of this differ, but as a general guidance. So, and if we look at, as we did in the beginning of the chapter on transactions, right? When we looked at the nature of the human being, خُلِقَ الْإِنسَانُ ضَعِيفًا, the human being has been created weak. We have been created مِنْ ذَكَرٍ أُنْثَى وَخَلَقْنَاكُمْ شُعُوبًا وَقَبَائِلَ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created us from male and female and made us into peoples and tribes, لِتَعَارَفُوا, so that you may come together and know one another in good, right? In good, right? And this is part of the opportunity of human beings, right? That our need is fulfilled through community. Our need is fulfilled through good relationships, which is why the emphasis on akhlaq. There's a worldly aspect, there's a spiritual dimension to akhlaq, to good character, but there's a worldly aspect. Good character helps people come together rather than part, right? Which fulfills human interests, both worldly and spiritual. Adab, good manners, bring people, help. There's a spiritual dimension to good manners, but it is a lubricant for good relations, right? Which facilitate collaboration. Yadullahi ma'al jama'a, al-jama'atu rahma. Allah's hand is with the group. And a jama'ah is people who come together with shared purpose. Right? وَالْفُرْقَةُ عَذَابٌ, and parting is torment. Right? Because that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَتَعَاوَنُوا عَلَى الْبِرِّ وَالتَّقْوَى. Us cooperate with each other in righteousness and mindfulness. Right? These things, because by these dimensions, by people coming together in good, by having this unity of purpose, by assisting one another, we facilitate في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة, good in this life and good in the next. Right? These maqasid of the Quran, right? رَبَّنَا آتِنَا, O Lord, grant us all good in this life and good in the next. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us what is the basis of the relationship between individuals. إِنَّمَا الْمُؤْمِنُونَ إِخْوَةً, the believers are but brethren. Right? And that applies more broadly in the brotherhood of humanity, as the Prophet ﷺ tells us, right? لا يؤمن أحدكم حتى يحب لأخيه ما يحب لنفسه. None of you believes until they wish for their brother what they wish for themselves. And the brotherhood here, the fraternity, is of humanity, as Qadi Iyad and Al-Nawawi and Al-Qurtubi and across the board the great hadith commentators, Mullah Ali Al-Qadi and Al-Munawi, and across the board the great hadith commentators, that's how they explain the hadith. Given even one because of the meaning of ukhuwa, of brotherhood, and other because other narrations of the hadith mentioned حتى يحب للناس, that they love for the people what they love for themselves. Right? So there's a metaphysical dimension to that al-khalqu iyalullah, creation are the dependents of Allah. Right? We see this notion of our existential fraternity to existence, to living things, to humanity, to the believers. Right? Because we are all the needy creatures of Allah. But then there's a moral responsibility. None of you believes until they wish for others of the good that they wish for themselves. Right? So this is how the believers they want the good for another. And we've been commanded to deal with each other bil ma'ruf, in that which is known to be good. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us then, إِنَّمَا الْمُؤْمِنُونَ إِخْوَةً فَأَصْلِحُوا بَيْنَ أَخَوَيْكُمْ. The believers are but brethren. And ikhwa, right, are those, ikha is those who come together on a shared basis. Right? There's ukhuwat and nasab, and those who come together due to having common parents. There's an ukhuwa of iman. There's a fraternity of faith, that we come together due to a common connecting relation, which is our parents. This ukhuwat with family, here the ukhuwat al-iman, because of a common faith, a common commitment to follow the Prophet ﷺ, a common commitment to the guidance of this religion and its values and what it calls to. And this ukhuwatul insaniya, the fraternity of humanity. So, brethren, want the good for one another. إِنَّمَا الْمُؤْمِنُونَ إِخْوَةً. And this innama, the believers are but. meaning they are nothing but this. So that is very significant, right? Which is why this is one of the most important of chapters, because it conveys some deep metaphysical, theological, spiritual teachings that then we can appreciate that their legal ramifications. So what happens? فَأَصْلِحُوا بَيْنَ أَخَوَيْكُمْ. So mend relations between your brethren. Why? Because if the believers are but brethren, the asl, the basis of their relationships is that it be على وجه الصلاح. أصلحوا is to take the means of bringing back salah, goodness in a relationship. أصلحوا, أصلح, يصلح is to make to bring the meaning of goodness to restore goodness, right? To restore goodness, right? 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 And that's why, that's the purpose. So, فَأَصْلِحُوا, so restore, so mend relations, reconcile between your brethren, meaning restore salah. But if you restore salah, what should be the asl in the relationships? That أن تكون على وجه الصلاح, to be on a basis that of established goodness, right? Goodness, which is that in which rights are fulfilled, protected, and not threatened, in which the meanings of goodness, ma'ruf, exist, the meanings of ihsan exist. So there's these levels, we talked about the levels of rights. So salah, there's a basic salah, which is that rights are fulfilled, protected, and not threatened, right? And the manifestation of that is wujud wasfut taradi, is finding the meaning of taradi, of mutual agreement between the two parties, or between that should exist, right? That should be the basis of all dealings. إِلَّا أَن تَكُونَ تِجَارَةً عَن تَرَاضٍ مِنْكُمْ, except that it be of dealings on the basis of mutual agreement. And that's the indicator of this wujud al-salah in the relationship, of the presence of goodness. And the Prophet ﷺ said, and this, of course, there's a material aspect that we will be focusing on here, but in other relationships as well. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's Messenger ﷺ tells us, أفضل الإيمان إصلاح ذات البين. The best of faith is taking the means to reconcile between disputing parties, right? Between two parties, whether between one and another, or between two other parties, as Allah says, فَأَصْلِحُوا بَيْنَ أَخَوَيْكُمْ. So mend relations between your brethren, right? It applies in your relationship with another, and it applies between two different parties as well. So, as-sulh is sulh here is from musalaha, right? As the commentator tells us, right? Sulh meaning musalaha, right? Meaning al-musalama ba'd al-mukhalafa, meaning that when return to silm, one reconciles after differing, one reconciles after difference, right? And its root, Imam al-Laknawi mentions from Al-Kifaya, Sharh al-Hidayah, that it is you need from salah, from goodness, which is istiqamatul hal, which is to have an upright state. To have an upright state. Here meaning an upright state of affairs. Right? To restore an upright state of affairs. And right? And the commentator gives a good definition here. هو شرعا عقد يرفع النزاع ويقطع الخصومة. That legally it is a contract that lifts dispute and cuts and ends the difference, right? That lifts the difference and ends the dispute. Right? So it's a contract that lifts the difference and ends the dispute. Right? And its basis is an offer and acceptance. And so we've seen that there's a strong urge in the Sharia to this. And the opposite of islah is ifsad, right? Is ifsad, harming relations. And the Prophet ﷺ warned, وَإِفْسَادُهَا هِيَ الْحَالِقَةِ, and corrupting relations is the shaver, said the Prophet ﷺ. لَا أَقُولُ إِنَّهَا تَحْلِقُ الشَّعْرِ, I do not say that it shaves hair. بَلْ تَحْلِقُ الدِّينِ, it shaves away religion itself. Now, how does one restore reconciliation? Let's say if there's a dispute. There's two parties and there's a dispute. Right? In general, if we step away from the specific Kitab al-Sulh, if there's a dispute, we've touched upon this before, but it bears reiterating because a governing religious value, right? That the basis is that if there's a relationship between two parties, it was established through taradi, through mutual agreement. And it's maintained with mutual agreement on the basis of what is agreed upon. Right? Now, then, if a dispute arises between the two parties, the basis is that, firstly, of course, there's an intangible aspect. If two parties disagree, or one party disagrees with the other, there's elements of akhlaq, right? Is to have خالق الناس بخلق حسن, deal with people on the basis of good character. So we know the elements of good character with respect to a relationship. Be patient with one another. Have a good opinion of one another. Overlook. فَلْيَعْفُوا, to forgive. وَلْيَصْفَحُوا, so forgive and overlook. Have mercy. Right? Because do you not love that Allah forgive you? Right? So these virtues, these are enveloping virtues, but those are intangibles, right? But there's an element of akhlaq. So if there's a dispute could arise, there's an onus to maintain relations, right? But then, if the dispute does arise, particularly if there is zulm, is wrongdoing, through taqsir or ta'addi la yutahammal, by there being a falling short in fulfillment of rights, or a transgression that cannot be borne, particularly without darar, without harm, or haraj, or hardship, then particularly, and in some cases, it may be recommended or required to reconcile, to address the thing, right? Even if it relates to one's own rights, but sometimes could relate to the rights of others. So for example, you hired someone to sell your product. They're not putting in the time. Now if they don't sell your product, you won't you won't earn. And if you don't earn, you can't provide for your family, nor can you pay your landlord, and your landlord's dependent on you to pay their bills, and you have debts and you'll be late on your debts, and your people, so you have these obligatory rights that you have to fulfill, so you can't just forego it, right? So there, what do? The first step is, and so not all seeking of rights would be selfish, right? If there's no interest, yes, you can be patient, overlook, etc., and these governing values, but sometimes it may be recommended if it's to preserve your own interests. But if it would cause you undue harm or lead to the non-fulfillment of rights obligatory upon you, it may be obligatory for you, just with your own consideration, in terms of the rights you owe others, to seek that reconciliation. And then there's another consideration where you may not accept the harm, which is if this person is a wrongdoer, which is also to stop them from their wrongdoing, right? That they do this to other people as well. Okay? So in seeking to redress a harmful situation, one can have numerous good intentions. One does it lillahi ta'ala. It's not just a selfish thing, although there's a right. You have a right to seek to preserve your good, worldly and next worldly, right? And you have a right, therefore, not to forego it. And it may be your responsibility not to forego it if it would cause others to be harmed, and it would be your duty not to forego your right if it leads to the non-fulfillment of other rights that you owe. Okay, so dispute arises. There's 4 steps. First thing to do is for the two parties themselves to come back to agreement. Right? So you hired somebody to work 40 hours a week in a sales role. That, okay, you'll be selling my carpets for a salary, 40 hours a week for $4,000. They only put in 10, 12, 15 hours, and it's not working for you, right? Because they're not doing their part. So you're patient for a while, this, that. Now the first step is for you to reconcile, just the two of you to reconcile, right? Individually, out of any external process, right? You suggest, look, can you do 15 hours a week? You've been doing 12 to 14 hours. Can we agree to 15 hours a week that you can commit to? Yes. And then you can go hire another person at 25 hours a week. Right? So you reconcile individually. Right? بين الطرفين. Secondly, is to bring in to have someone who comes in as a musalih, as a mediator, right? So who comes in as a mediator, right? 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 So you bring in someone that the two parties trust. Now the role of the musalih, this process called musalaha, you bring them in, they are simply, the mediator is bringing the two parties closer together, right? And there's processes of mediation, right? The musalih's role is they're just bringing the two parties closer together, right? They're not giving a judgment. Parties disagree. So, I'm offering the person 15 hours a week. They're saying, no, I have a full-time job. But you're not doing your job. And they can't reconcile. There's a lot of emotions and negativity. So they bring someone in for musalaha, right, to reconcile the two parties. But the agreement will be between the two parties. The role of the mediator is basically to bring the two, فَأَصْلِحُوا بَيْنَ أَخَوَيْكُمْ, right? That they have separation and the mediator brings them back together. But it's non-binding. If they don't want to come closer together, the mediator can't do much. Right? And there's religious guidelines for mediation, there's practical worldly guidelines for mediation. Right? Then the third, if that's not possible, they couldn't agree. Number two, the musalaha couldn't work, there is a tahkim, and that'll be coming in another chapter. Right? A tahkim, which is to have arbitration. Right? This is outside of court. They're so far apart, they will come closer together. So in the tahkim, the two parties agree to a binding adjudication. Right? So someone becomes a hakam or a muhakkim, right? Between them. They will judge between them. And there's rules related to that, we'll see. You can only judge according to the principles and process of tahkim in the Sharia. And a lot of people take this on and don't فَمَا رَعُوهَا حَقَّ رِعَايَتِهَا. They don't take care of it with what is due in this process, and they end up accruing a lot of sin as a result. Right? And the difference between musalaha, between mediation and adjudication, right, and tahkim, is the tahkim, the two parties agree for this person to judge between them. The role of the musalih is that they are bringing the two parties together to agree on something, right? To agree on something. And one thing they may suggest is something in the middle, etc. They're not determining who owes what. Tahkim is different. In the tahkim, the person looks at the case and they make a legal judgment on it, that this is what is due. Sometimes what is required in a particular case is musalaha, is reconciliation. Sometimes what is required is for someone to rule between them. But the scope of tahkim is limited. Right? Right? So it needs to be defined. What exactly do we want tahkim over? What do we agree to? So, and it's tricky, right? Because you can't judge, because you can't force someone to do something that's outside the scope of what they've agreed to in the tahkim. So this leads to problems, like, because the role of is to just, they're acting like a judge in court, but out of court. And if that's not possible, right, then the fourth level is al-qada, right, is to go to court. And qada, actually many of the Hanafis deemed it to be one of the ibadat, and one of the acts of devotion, right? Because the wisdom of Allah is the wise creator, and He's the merciful creator, and al-khusuma wal-niza', right? And there being dispute and fighting, right? This is the fear of the angels in the creation of the human beings. أَتَجْعَلُ فِيهَا مَنْ يُفْسِدُ فِيهَا. Will you place in it one who will spread corruption? It was خُرُوجُ عَنِ الْإِنْتِظَامِ وَمَا فِيهِ صَلَاحٌ وَيَسْفِكُ الدِّمَاء, and will even go to the extent of spilling blood. فَقَضَاء, the wisdom of qada is that it فيه قطع الخصومات, it cuts disputes, right? Right? But there are downsides to that as well. There's downsides because So this is an important framework to be aware, right? Because we believe in, right? Like, إن الله يأمر بالعدل والإحسان. Allah has commanded to justice and good, right? On the one side, right? And the number two is that nobody has rights over another except where granted. Okay, so that's the background that we wanted to touch upon a little bit because it's important. Okay. Sulh. Right? So Sulh, reconciliation, is على ثلاثة أضرب. Right? Is of three types. Reconciliation is of three types. الصلح مع الإقرار is reconciliation with admission of what is being disagreed upon. وصلح مع السكوت, and reconciliation with silence. Right? So for example, reconciliation with dispute is, let's say, someone comes to my house and they see this carpet that is from their store. Say, you bought that carpet from me, but didn't pay for it. I say, yes. Say, you owe me $150. I said, no, I think it was 100. But I then I admit to it. Yes, yes, I do owe you. Let's forget the 150. Yes, I owe you. And we settle on an amount. Right? Sulh مع الإقرار, and it's not a condition that the extent be known. Right? لا يشترط أن يكون معلوم القدر. You know, I admit to the right owed, but I don't have to admit to the exact amount. Right? The other is a sulh ala sukut, right? I'm about to give khutbah, and a friend of mine says, "See, Faraz, that jubbah is mine." I say, "Here, take $100." Right? I did not say it is his or not. I just reconciled, and that's it. Another is, right, والصلح مع سكوت, reconciliation with silence. وأن لا يقر المدعى عليه ولا ينكره, is where the party that the claim is being made against does not admit it nor deny it. Right? I don't want to deal with the hassle of sitting down, either taking off the jubbah, because I didn't iron the shirt under the jubbah. I just did it up. You can just see the collar. And this is, I don't want to just deal with the headache, or whatever reason. I don't admit it and I don't deny it either. وَالصُّلْحْ مَعَ إِنْكَارٍ, and a reconciliation with denial. Right? Which is when I settle even though I deny it. Right? I settle even though I deny it. How? Let's say, I made there's rumors going on about the black seed being a cure for coronavirus. They say this medicine that Donald Trump, of course, then you can see how reliable a chain of narration this is. Right? Donald Trump claims that there's this particular thing that could well be a cure for, or a treatment for coronavirus. It's said to be derived from the black seed. Now, of course, the chain of medical establishment there may have many jumps. I say, سمعت Donald Trump يقول, right? I heard Donald Trump say that, anybody would, he's may have demonstrated not to be a medical authority. But let's say that someone made a mix of black seed oil and honey and sold it. Someone says that you made me sick, and you owe me all my medical bills. Say no. My product didn't. I don't accept that it made you sick. So I want to take you to court for $1 million. Say, look, take $5,000 and just khalas, end this. Am I admitting to being wrong? No. This is sulh ma'al inkar. Imam al-Shafi'i did not like this. Right? But the basis of this, that even reconciliation when you're denying the other, it's understood, number one, as he says, وَكُلُّ ذَلِكَ جَائِزٌ, all of this is permitted, right? It's permitted and it is praiseworthy. وَمُسْتَحَبٌ لِإِطْلَاقِ قَوْلِهِ تَعَالَى وَالصُّلْحُ خَيْرٌ, because of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling us that reconciliation is good, right? Now, if you look at the context of the verse relates to the rights of the two spouses in a specific context. But as Imam Lakhnawi says, that even though this came with respect to the husband and wife coming back to reconciliation if they dispute, but العبرة لعموم اللفظ لا لخصوص السبب. Right? What counts is لعموم اللفظ. In Quranic interpretation, the consideration is of the general indication of لعموم اللفظ, of the general indication of the words, لا لخصوص السبب, not for the specificity of the cause. Right? It's from Imam Lakhnawi on the Hidayah. Right? Okay. Right? And also, because the L, right, here it entails يقتضي أن كل صلح خير, right? 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 And وَكُلُّ خَيْرٍ مَشْرُوع, right? And everything that is good by the standard of the Sharia is كُلُّ خَيْرٍ مَشْرُوع, right? And every khair is legislated. Okay, so this is the background, right? And there's hadiths about it as well, right? Right? The condition is, unless it's something that makes a halal haram, etc., right? That's not in itself khair, right? Okay. And you can see the wisdom in it, right? You can see the wisdom in it. Why? Because in many cases, you don't want, like, it would cause greater harm, whether in the relationship or for you, to dispute a claim, right? Having to go through mediation or arbitration or court may be difficult. So this is يدفع النزاع, right? And also because of the consideration that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, as the commentator mentioned, وَلَا تَنَازَعُوا from Surah Al-Anfal. Right? Verse 46. وَلَا تَنَازَعُوا, and do not dispute. Right? 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 So then he then makes tafriya. Right? So he tells us. Right? فإن وقع الصلح عن إقرار اعتبر فيه ما يعتبر في البيعات إن وقع عن مال. Right? Right? If the sulh takes place on the basis of mutual agreement, right? Through admission. The sulh happens through admission. Someone claims that you owe me the money for this carpet. Okay, yes, I do. Yes, I admit to it. Right? What counts in it, i.e. in the sulh, is what is considered in sales transactions if they take place on money. Right? Meaning that there would be an offer and an agreement. Right? Let's say you didn't pay for this carpet, but then I admit to that. Right? So we reconcile because we forgot how much the sale was for. So we come to an agreement. Right? So it requires offer and acceptance. وإن وقع عن مال بمنافع فيعتبر بالإيجارات. And if the admission, sulh مع الإقرار, sulh with admission, takes place in with respect to a benefit, right? A benefit, then it's considered as contracts of sale, of hire, of ijara are considered, right? What will be the case? That someone was, said, could I move into your basement? I'll rent it from you. Said sure, and the person moved in. Said, but we didn't agree on a price. Yes, it is a rental agreement. So they say, okay. So what happens? The things that you need to define in a rental agreement, you need to define there, for example, right? Because we could fight it out. You owe me. Say, okay, let's come to an agreement. Okay. And this happens often, right? People, they're negotiating and the person sort of rushes into it. Right? It's happened more than once that we were going to hire someone, we didn't even make an offer yet. And the person said, well, I did a week's work. So said, okay. And you say, okay, yes, I admit that you worked. Let's agree on something. That's a hire. We don't have, because if the actual contract is there, then there's no sulh, right? So this happens when some right is disputed, that there's some claim that is being made. You admit to it that, okay, you worked, okay, I admit to it. And it's considered sulh ala iqrar, sulh on the basis of admission, whether it is actually the way the other person is claiming or not. Right? So someone makes a claim, the party says, okay. And that's part of وَلْيَعْفُوا, overlook. That, technically, I don't have to say, no, technically you're not hired, but, no, it's okay. Bismillah. Right? والصلح عن السكوت والإنكار في حق المدة عليه لافتداء اليمين وقطع الخصومة. But a reconciliation that happens on silence. You don't admit to it, or on denial. With respect to the one whom the claim is being made against, is so that they don't have to swear an oath. And in order to end the dispute. Right? Right? Because if you deny, then in court you'd have to swear by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? Right? Because if someone comes and makes a claim against me, morally I can swear by Allah, I swear by Allah that you don't owe this. Right? So let's say the person comes and says, I didn't gift that to you. How come it's in your living room? I said, you owe me $200 for it. They make this claim. Now I could swear by Allah. If I say, I swear by Allah that you gifted it to me, does my oath bind him to anything? No. Unless he believes it, right? Unless he believes it. He doesn't have to believe it. Say, but I am upright. He says, I don't believe you, right? Because I don't have wilaya, I don't have authority over that person, and they have their rights, I have my rights, right? So he can't just grab it from me, and I can't just say, I've sworn, therefore you can't take it. That becomes gangster law. Okay? Now morally, if an upright person swears an oath, you should accept it. But you may genuinely not believe it. That's where it goes to court. So the wisdom of the sulh, when the person is silent, is like, why would you reconcile? Say, you gifted it to me. Say, listen, let's just settle on $100. That's sukut. Person said, I didn't gift it to you. I don't want to argue. Say, why don't we settle on 100? I'm not admitting that he didn't gift it to me. I just said, let's just settle on 100. So I have this carpet in my living room. He says, I sell them for $1,000, for $100. Like, you owe me, you didn't buy $150. I said, right? So this same scenario could take iqrar. I could admit to it, but that has implications. I may not want to admit to it. Right? I may just be silent, either not to prolong the dispute, or because I may genuinely not remember. I may have misunderstood. Or I may actually deny it. And why would I deny it? One, because I may genuinely not believe him. And the other, because I don't want to create a precedent. As in the case of, if I sell a product that someone says it caused them harm, if I just stay silent and reconcile, right, there may be secondary legal implications to that. السكوت في موضع الإقرار إقرار. Being silent in a place of admission could be taken as an admission. Right? So should you deny something or not? That's something that has legal implications, right? Right? And that's with respect to the one who the claim was made against. وفي حق المدعى ففي حق المدعي بمعنى المعاوضة. But with respect to the one making the claim, it has the meaning of exchange, and they received, it's considered muawada, compensation. Right? وإذا صالح عن دار لم تجب فيها شفعة. If one settled with respect to a home, a dar, a property, sulh does not arise from that. Right? This is if the sulh took place on the basis of بإنكار أو سكوت. Right? This is in the case of denial or silence. Right? How would that happen? Right? You need a little bit of creative imagination. That, let's say, extended family You moved into this home, you understood that your uncle gave you the house. Right? Right? So Uncle Jamil owns 3 properties. Property A, B, and C. To the left of property A of Uncle Jamil's is property X. Property X is owned by Zubair. Uncle Jamil says, Umar beta, you're so nice, so caring. Take property A. So you thought you own it. Right? Now, then Uncle Jamil said, oh beta, where is my $1 million? Now, if you admitted to that, if you made a sulh, with admission, how would it count? It'd be considered like a sales transaction. That I'm admitting that he transferred ownership, and I'm admitting to, and we settle on $1 million, or we settle on 750,000. Right? Whatever we agree upon. So that's where sulh on admission there, right? Uncle Jamil has 3 properties, A, B, and C. To the left of it is Zubair's property. Here, the sulh on admission would entail what? It's considered like a sale. So if Uncle Jamil sold property A to a third party, the adjacent neighbor, let's just say there's one, Zubair, he has preemption rights on it, which we've taken before, so we won't go into it, right? But if the sulh was done with silence, I don't admit to it. Exactly this. It could be exactly the same scenario. Uncle Jamil says, beta, you owe me $1 million for the home. You don't admit to it. You don't admit to the claim. He says, Uncle, could we settle on 1,000, 100, on 500,000? In this case, what is it considered? The sulh ala sukut. Reconciliation on the basis of, I didn't admit that he sold it to me. I didn't admit that I owe him the money. Wealthy family, let's say, they have these kinds of money lying around. In that case, if you're silent or you deny it, say, no, uncle, you don't, but I believe you gifted it to me, but I don't want to fight you. Take $500,000. That's sulh ala inkar. In these two, why am I settling? Ostensibly, so I don't have to take you to court. Right? Number one, liftida il yamin. So I don't have to swear in oath, an oath meaning fil qada, right? Right? In a legal judgment. Because I may have this dispute with Uncle Jamil, but we're in business together. We're going to get a bad name. It's going to waste our time. We got to make money, or we got to serve the ummah, whatever our maqasid are. And number two, to end the dispute, I don't want to fight Uncle Jamil. Let's say it's Zubair's situation. He thought Uncle Jamil gave them the property, him and Zubaydah. Then he says, beta, you owe me $1 million for this. Now he can't. He's not going to take his father-in-law to court. He says, Uncle Jamil, I do believe that you gifted it to us. I don't have proof though. But I don't accept this claim. But in order to avoid dispute, in this case, what happens? This sulh ala inkar, in both these cases, it's not considered like a sale. It's considered that this is to end the dispute and not have to take it to court. But with respect to Uncle Jamil, the one who made the claim, it's considered to be muawada, considered to be exchange. As if with respect to him, it's as if he received payment for that property, right? Muawada. Okay. وإذا كان الصلح عن إقرار فاستحق بعض المصالح عنه رجع المدعى عليه بحصة ذلك من العوض. Okay. So now he goes into the practical, messy details, right? That if there is a sulh on iqrar, there's reconciliation on the basis of admission. That's considered like a sale, right? فاستحق, then istihqaq is ظهور حق ثالث, right? استحقاق is يعني ظهر حق ثالث. The right of a third party became manifest, right? بعض المصالح عليه. So let's take that case, right? Uncle Jamil claimed that the property that Zubair and Zubaydah moved into had been sold to Zubair. Zubair admitted to it, right? Yes, I admit. You said it's a sale. He says, "Haan beta, but we're losers. We didn't agree on the price." Okay, so you settled. You admitted and then you settled. Say, okay, how about 750,000? Said, sure. Now you made the sale, then it turns out, because you got this property, that there is the main home, there's a garden, there's a pathway at the back, but there's a shed that has been converted into a garden office with its own door to the pathway at the back. Turns out that Hamza Khan wanted to live simply. He bought that backyard house. And he proved it. Look, I have a sales deed. Uncle Jamil sold it. He signed it. We actually did a video recording of the sale ceremony. See, the Yaqub recorded it. Okay. I just paid, what is this considered? When I admitted to the 750,000, I said that I purchased the house from you. I admit, made sulh ala iqrar. There's istihqaq, which is ظهور حق ثالث. The right of a third party became manifest. Like on the house, رجع المدعى عليه. Then بحصة ذلك من العوض. Here, the one the claim was made against, i.e. Zubair, has a right of return to the one who'd made the claim against them. That was the basis of the reconciliation, i.e. Uncle Zubair, with the share of that الشيء المستحق, of that which المستحق, of that which was owed, of the iwad, of the payment. So we get a market appraisal. Okay, the property was actually worth $1 million. Zubair got a good deal. He paid 750,000. Of this property, how much is that? Is the shed that was converted into what Uncle Jamil had referred to as a garden office home? Said it was $100,000. Tiny little space, actually. So I get that. So it was 10% of the value. If we settled for 750,000, 10% of that, I have a right of refunding it from, or Zubair has a right of refunding it from the one who'd made a claim against him, which is Uncle Jamil. Right? And this is because a sulh ma'al iqrar كالبيع, a reconciliation on basis of admission is like a sale. It's as if, when Zubair admitted that yes, the house was sold to him by Uncle Jamil, then this counts, this admission makes it like a sale. What is the price? The price is the amount that they agreed upon. وإذا وقع الصلح عن سكوت أو إنكار فاستحق المنازع فيه رجع المدعي بالخصومة ورد العوض. But if the sulh, the reconciliation, took place with silence or with denial, and then the item disputed turned out فاستحق المنازع فيه, that the item that was disputed, that was the subject of the sulh, right, المنازع فيه, which is الذي كان موضوع موضوع الصلح, that was the subject of the sulh, right? If it turned out that all of it belonged to someone else, right? So it was not just that Hamza had purchased the shed at the back. Turns out that Uncle Jamil made this claim that Zubair had purchased the property. Zubair said, "Yeah, I did, but sorry, I got busy with the mayor. I said, don't talk about my daughter." So, okay, let's settle. So if here Zubair didn't agree, sulh ala sukut, he said, you bought it from me. He said, uncle, can we just settle on 750,000? Or denial. He says, no, I don't believe that you sold it to me, but I don't want to fight you, uncle. Let's settle on 500,000, right? In this case, استحق المنازع فيه, the item that was the subject of the dispute turns out to be the right of a third party. It was actually already sold to Hamza. How would that happen? Many things. Uncle Jamil has lots of properties. He buys and sells chaotically. But I already settled. Right? رجع المدعي بالخصومة ورد العوض. Right? In this case, the رجع, sorry, there's an error here, right? رجع, what does your copy say? Okay, رجع, sorry. So رجع, read the عبارة. وإن وقع الصلح
عن سكوت أو إنكار فاستحق المنازع فيه الشرح كله. رجع المدعي بالخصومة على المستحق.
Okay. رجع المدعي بالخصومة على المستحق. Right? In this case, right, when it turns out to belong to a third party in its entirety, the one who made the claim, right, the one who made the claim in the dispute that was the subject of the sulh, right, returns what was rightfully due to the third party, i.e. Hamza. Right? So the property wasn't Uncle Jamil's. Right? He made the claim that I sold it to you. Zubair was just silent or denied it. But then turns out it entirely belonged to Hamza. So in this case, Uncle Jamil, who made the claim that it was a sale to Zubair, Uncle Jamil returns the item, the property, to the third party, i.e. Hamza, and he must refund the iwad, must refund the $500,000 that was the settlement, right? That's called al-musalah bihi. Right? That was the subject of the sulh, right? Right? And if part of it was due, then part of it, right, وَإِنِ اسْتُحِقَّ بَعْضُ ذَلِكَ. And in this case, and this is connected, right? That's why in a good modern edition there would be proper paragraphing here. And if some of the item was turned out to be to belong to a third party, that's what istihqaq means, ظهور حق ثالث, right? رد حصته, one would return its share, ورجع بالخصومة فيه, and would return its extent of it, right? And then it gets messy, right? Because what if, like if it's a property, like Zubayr and Zubaydah don't want Hamza to be living in their backyard, right? That would be a separate matter, right? Okay. وإن ادعى حقا في دار ولم يبينه, right? If the claimant makes a claim to have a right in a property and they don't specify the right, right? Right? And they don't specify how much, what's the extent of the right, right? Then what happens? Right? So it doesn't mention that I own the shed in the back, right? Some specific portion or a specific percentage. He just said, I own a right in this property. فصولح من ذلك على شيء, right? Right? Two brothers, or husband and wife, marriage ended, wife says, ex-wife says, I had a share of the house. Oh, there we go. Gets it. Can we just drop this? Here's $200,000. She agreed. Right? فصولح من ذلك. يعني? So that right they settled. But she didn't say how much she owes. She said, okay, let's not dispute. We fought long enough. Right? ثم استحق بعض الدار. And then some of the house, some of the property turns out to belong to a third party. Uncle Jamil. Uncle Jamil says, Beta, by the way, I own 25% of that home. I never surrendered full ownership rights. And he could prove it. That though Zubayr thought he purchased the house from Uncle Jamil, sly businessman, only sold him 75% of the house. And proved it. In this case, لم يرد شيئا من العوض. So Zubayr would not return anything of what the settlement payment was to the claimant, Zubaydah. Right? So Zubaydah made a claim against Zubayr that she owned part of the house, and it wasn't specified what percentage, what part, or what percentage. Before so they settled. Right? They settled. After they settled, for let's say $200,000, after that, some of it turned out to be the right of a third. That's what istihqaq is, right? ظهور حق ثالث, Uncle Jamil. So what's the ruling? Yeah, none of the iwad, none of the amount that was the settlement was on is returned. Zubaydah doesn't have to return anything to Zubayr. Why? لأن دعواه يجوز أن تكون فيما بقي, because the claim, i.e. Zubaydah's claim of owning some part of the house that's non-specific, could be in the remaining portion. And of course, Imam al-Quduri lays out some scenarios, leaves others implicit. And that's why if you actually took notes and then diagrammed the possibilities, you'd see that there are sections that are unstated that can be understood by implication and can be dug up by actually searching for them. That's also the role of, that's where a student would come to class with questions. Okay. Then he says, وَالصُّلْحُ جَائِزٌ في عن دعوى الأموال. Right? 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 Sulh is valid from claims related to items of value. Right? To items of value, of mal. Right? Right? So this is amwal, which is items of value. Carpet, apartment, property, car, right? Right? Because these are the subject of sales transactions. Wal manafi', and benefits, because these are the subject of إجارة وجناية العمد والخطأ. And sulh is also valid with respect to a jinaya of a transgression that was deliberate or erroneous. The jinaya ala this is where which is a transgression that led to the loss of life or limb. Right? And we'll come to that in Kitab al-Jinayat, right? That in some scenarios, the individual, if they lost a limb, right, through another's error or deliberately, and we'll see the scenarios of that when we get to it, right? And the jinayat al-amd, a transgression. So someone was doing they're using a lawnmower, and they're listening to a beautiful qasida, al-qasida zayniyah, and they got so lost in the beautiful recitation, they're going, and they mowed over Zubayr's foot. So Zubayr lost his foot. Now there's a punishment for that. The jinayat, let's say it's amd or khata, but they came to a settlement. And look, let's not take this to court. Here's $1,000. So Zubayr says, okay, sure, or whatever. And that's valid, right? Because of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, فَمَنْ, and you can see the textual basis for that as well. Right? So one can settle there. But we'll see in jinayat, because we don't want to go into all the ahkam al-jinayat, because they're coming under criminal, under court law. وَلَا يَجُوزُ مِنْ دَعْوَ حَدٍّ. But one cannot make a settlement from a claim of a had, of a had punishment. Right? So, someone wants to make a claim that this person committed zina. You can't just make a settlement on that of actual zina. The different hudud, and we'll see the hudud, because the hudud have a haqq of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? You can't settle on behalf of another. So there's lesser crimes, the jinayat, and then there's a hudud, and we'll see the distinguishing criteria for that when we come to it. Right? So the jinayat, amd and khata, right? These are lesser crimes, right? But had punishments, because they relate to the right of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, so you can't make a settlement on behalf of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? Because you don't have the right. to do that. Okay. The settlement there would be for the person to drop their claim, right? And we'll get to that, right? Now, what about marriage? Right? 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 So he tells us, وإذا ادعى رجل على امرأة نكاحا وهي تجحد فصالحته على مال بذلته حتى يترك الدعوة جاز وكان ذلك في معنى الخلع. If a man claims that he had married a woman and she denies it, right? So there, Zubayr says, Zubayr, that we married. He says, no, we didn't. Right? So she's denying it. فصالحته على مال بذلته. And she made a settlement that, look, we didn't marry, but here is some money that we can make a settlement on and drop your claim. This is akin to a khula. This is with respect to him, right? This is with respect to him, right? Because he believes that it was a marriage, right? But on her part, it is not considered what? It's just like the sulh ala inkar, right? She's denying it. Does it count as a marriage? Does she count that she was married? No. Because she's with respect to her, the sulh on denial is considered for what? To drop the claim in court. She doesn't want to take the matter to court. That's where sulh can also be abused, right? And there needs to be safeguards to protect people from being abused by false claims in this way, right? So unless, sulh can be munkar. Someone blackmails a woman, said, look, you either marry me, if you don't agree that you're married to me, I'm going to tell people that you were secretly married to me. He says, don't do that. But she's engaged now to marry somebody. If he finds out, if this comes out, she'll be, that guy may back out, whatever. So she makes a settlement. But these kinds of blackmailing, individually, she might, this sulh would be valid, but societally, this is blackmail, and that this is a grave harm, right? And that money would not be tayyib. The morally, a false claim like that, morally would have to be returned. Okay. Right, so it counts as a khula with respect to him, but not with respect to her. So she doesn't have to do idda, etc. Right? And here, interestingly, of course, there are differing copies of the. Okay, now it says وَإِنِ ادَّعَتْ إِمْرَأَةٌ نِكَاحًا عَلَى رَجُلٍ. If a woman claims that she married a man, i.e. وَهُوَ يَجْحَدْ, and he is denying it, فَصَالَحَ عَلَى مَالٍ, but he settles with her over a certain amount. She says, Zubaydah says, Zubayr, we married. So what does he do? He denies, no, we didn't, but here, take some money. So he says, لم يجوز الصلح. This sulh is not valid. And this is very interesting. Right? Because there are two copies here of both of the of Quduri, and in the Hidayah, right? Right? It actually says jaza, right? 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 And it's not being valid. And there's ikhtilaf al-tasheeh. Is this valid or not? Right? The Hidayah chose the copy that says this is valid. Right? In the matan. Right? And you can see it, the discussion there. The reasoning that's here, this lam yajuz, which the author of the Lubab says is the stronger one, and he based this on the reasoning in the ikhtiyar of al-Mawsili, that this is, as mentioned by the tasheeh of Allama Qasim, this is not valid. So what's the scenario? The woman claimed to have married Zubair. Zubaydah claimed to marry Zubair. He says, no, you didn't. Now he's giving her a payment. The problem is, what is the payment for? Right? So, right? فَصَلَحَ عَلَى مَالٍ. He made a settlement for an amount. This لم يجوز الصلح. Why? Because what's he paying the money for? Right? Right? If it's considered to be a separation, right? The husband doesn't have to pay for separation, particularly when he's in denial, right? 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 And if it's considered, it's not considered payment for, so it could be either considered a payment for separation, but the husband doesn't have to pay for a separation. Right? And if it's considered just a payment for there not to be a claim, but they're not, the basis is that two people aren't married. Right? So it cannot be considered an exchange, and it cannot be considered. So, so what is this money for? Right? In this case, right? Right? So this payment is in exchange for nothing, so it's not valid. Right? And this first reasoning is sounder. You can see its details in this case, because we can't consider, there's no sound basis to consider this exchange. There's nothing we can soundly consider this exchange to be for. Right? Right? Because this would be considered to be like rashwa. Right? It's just considered to be, like just purely a false claim. Okay. Any questions? وإن ادعى رجل أنه عبده فصلحه على مال أعطاه جاز وكان في حق المدعي في معنى العتق على مال. If a man claims that I am your slave, and the man makes a settlement and makes a payment, that payment is considered with respect to the one making the claim like being freed, right? What's the scenario? Zubair claims that he is a slave owned by Uncle Jamil. Uncle Jamil says. So what does Uncle Jamil say? Because let's say it's famous that Uncle Jamil is very generous to his slaves. People want to be his slave, right? Because he gives medical care and all these services. So Uncle Jamil is like, I have my full quota of slaves, right? It's expensive for him to have slaves. So in idda'a rajulun annahu abduhu. A man claims, so Zubair claims, I am your slave, Uncle Jamil. What? Yeah. وَإِنِ ادَّعَى عَلَى رَجُلٍ أَنَّهُ عَبْدُهُ. Right? وَإِنِ ادَّعَى عَلَى عَبْدٍ أَنَّهُ عَبْدُهُ. Right? Right? And the man denies. Right? Right? وإن ادعى على رجل أنه عبده. يعني إن ادعى على رجل أنه عبده فصالحه. Right? So he denies this, but then settles for an amount, right, that he gives. جاز وكان في حق المدعي في معنى العتق على مال لزعمه أنه يملكه. Right? So the situation in ادعى على رجل أنه عبده. So Uncle Jamil claims, sorry, the scenario in ادعى, I missed the على, sorry. Right? In ادعى على رجل, if someone claims, makes a claim against another man, that man أنه أن هذا الرجل عبده. If one makes a claim against a person, that person أنه أن هذا الرجل عبده أي عبد المدعي. Right? 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 If someone claims against a man, that man أنه أي الرجل عبده عبد المدعي فصالحه. فصالح الرجل المدعي المدعية. So the one the claim is being made against. Right? So Uncle Jamil claims that Zubair, you belong to me. Right? So the mudda'i is Uncle Jamil. The rajul, the claim, who's al-mudda'a alayhi, the claim is being against is Zubair. What's the claim? That Zubair is Uncle Jamil's slave. فَصَلَحَهُ. So Zubair makes a sulh with the mudda'i, with the claimant, Uncle Zubair, for a purpose. Said, no, I'm not, but here, take $1,000. This is valid. وَكَانَ فِي حَقِّ الْمُدَّعِ. And this would count with respect to the claimant, i.e. Uncle Jamil, to be like, because what's he claiming? That he owns Zubair. Zubair settles with him for $1,000. كان في معنى العتق على مال. It would be considered like freeing him in exchange for money. Right? As if Zubayr did belong to Uncle Jamil, says, if you pay me $1,000, you're free. Gives $1,000, he's free. Right? Right? And then what happens? What does this money count as with respect to the one, of the one who the claim was made against? It depends on whether it was on agreement or denial, and you can see that in the commentary. And today we'll stop here. There's a couple more issues from Kitab Sulh. We'll continue from there, but the opening was important. And then we have Kitab al-Hiba. We'll aim to do Kitab al-Hiba next class. The al-Hiba is very straightforward. وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم والحمد لله رب العالمين.
Does the sulh with iqrar entail for the two parties what is entailed by a plain iqrar? So what is the difference between the two?
Sorry?
Does the sulh with iqrar entail for the two parties what is entailed by plain iqrar? So what is
No. Because iqrar can just mere admission has different scenarios. Right? A sulh, right? Because iqrar has many, like iqrar could be in court, right? Like a sulh, they come to a reconciliation. Iqrar could be just, so simple admission, that's in court, right? For example, someone takes him to court, says he owes me, said that carpet was mine. So the person says, it is. Khalas. Judgment is made just on iqrar. Right? So iqrar could be through court, but sulh is the two parties settle on something, right? Settle. Either on the amount claimed or they come to some other claim, other settlement, right? Okay. Other questions?
So far no.
Okay. Okay, Bismillah. So we'll stop there. صلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وسلم.